Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
Welcome, everyone, to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. I'm glad you could join me today. Make sure you follow and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, visit the PAS Report website, pasreport.com, and share this episode with your family and friends. So we're kicking off the new year, and I have a fantastic guest. He's been on the program before, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, runs the London Center, author of Operation Dark Heart, now the Chowan County, North Carolina County Commissioner. Tony, how are you today?
Hi, Nick, I'm doing super well. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to join you, and I always super appreciate our discussions. So I'm thankful to be here and look at the new year. So thank you.
Well, our discussions are always awesome, and I want to start off because I don't think people realize the gravity and the chain of events that followed the withdrawal from Afghanistan that we've witnessed worldwide. So briefly, can you explain to the audience how disastrous Afghanistan was and how it relates to everything that followed?
Sure. Politically, it was the point in time that the Biden administration went underwater and never came back regarding polling. So that is the beginning with the end in mind. That's what happened. It destroyed the legacy of the Biden administration in one event. Everything else was downhill, and it stayed downhill. So why was that? Well, it was because, first off, the plan that they implemented was not the plan that President Trump and Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, had come up with. The plan, just so we're clear, by Trump and Pompeo, and I talked to Mike Pompeo about this. I was consulted. They didn't listen to me much, but I was consulted, just saying. And the plan was to reconcile the Taliban with the existing government of Afghanistan, basically create a coalition government. They would merge the two together, and then we'd leave, leaving intact some governance that included both the Taliban and the Afghan government. That was the plan. Well, they didn't do the plan. They basically said, yeah, that's too hard. We're just going to leave. We're just leaving. So literally.
And we were going to keep Bagram, right?
Yeah. The plan was to always maintain Bagram because, first off, we invested billions of dollars into this place. It's a huge base. I spend a good amount of time there. Great place. It's away from Kabul. It's about an hour away from Kabul, so you don't have the population. It's at the base of mountains, so you've got some level of protection around you. Great place. And, oh, by the way, it's on the doorstep of Pakistan, Iran, and China. Kind of important. But now we're just going to walk away. And that's literally what happened. So in the middle of the night, literally in August, the word was given, abandon your posts, just leave. And people I talked to are like, what? And literally people were just literally locking doors and putting the keys down and walking away. So we left on the ground the fourth largest standing army, conventional army on the planet. Fourth largest. Just walk away. Just let it go. Just flitter away. So the effect of that was, and of course they say, oh, that's not really our stuff. We gave it to the Afghans. Who believes that? It's like, no, it's our stuff. We gave it to them. They took it, but it's still our stuff.
Yeah, and the Taliban's better armed and equipped today than it was prior to us going in on 9/11.
Right. Both economically, militarily, and politically. They are stronger. They were stronger when we left than when we came in late 2001. Think about that, Nick. We enriched the very enemy we were working to defeat. And that's what we were trying not to do. And then, of course, if you are a lefty, and you're not, I've watched your stuff, you're not a lefty, but if you were a lefty, you would theoretically be all upset because women's rights, all the work to engage women and put them in schools, that's all gone overnight. It's like, yeah, you women we've been trying to support, yeah, we don't care. What's a woman anyway, right? Who could define a woman? So they literally left all the social engineering that the left had done, the nation building, they abandoned that. It's all gone, literally. And so I think even those on the left who are honest, which are not many, recognize that, hey, this is a bad idea. Us abandoning these women and building women's rights is not a good example for us for the rest of the world. Now, but again, it was the mono party, the Democrat neolibs and neocons who just decided, we're done here. We just don't want to play anymore. And then when they decided this, Nick, as I said, they just abandoned all the military stuff. Oh yeah, we'll take the military out and leave the State Department. Who in their right mind believes the State Department is able to do anything military or security? But that's what they did. They decided that we're going to leave, Anthony Blinken, of Winken, Blinken, and Nod. Winken is Jake Sullivan. Blinken is Blinken, and Nod is General Austin. Yeah, we're going to take the State Department and put them in charge of everything. And then insanity ensued. You had to then re-insinuate DOD into Kabul, which is the worst possible environment to put military forces back into, an urban environment. Nick, you and I have talked about this before. The worst possible place to have to fight a war is in an urban environment. And that's what they did. So now they have to put the military back in. And you have the Abbey Gate incident where, oh, by the way, we were tracking this guy. We knew he was a bad guy, but we never gave permission to the guy at the gate who could have shot the guy with the explosives. And the ensuing thing resulted in the death of 13 service members, hundreds of other Afghan nationals, and untold injury to those around them, to include amputations and everything else. That was what happened. And so there's no adequate explanation. Within the last 10 days, Tony Blinken finally, in front of Congress, apologized, we're kind of sorry. But he didn't take any responsibility. It's like, it was like saying, I'm sorry the weather was bad. I'm sorry a cold front came through and froze everything. No, so that's why I believe, Nick, that from that point forward, from the failed Afghan tragedy forward, the Biden administration was toast. And they never once got back into positive polling territory after that. And I would argue that was just kind of the veneer coming off the rotted corpse. Well, no, he's still alive. The rotted effigy that is the Joe Biden administration. So,
yeah. And look, I tend to believe that that's exactly when the Russian leader, Vladimir Putin, said, you know what? I'm going to go into Ukraine. I'm going to give the green light for the operation, because we were seeing the military buildup in March of 2021. So it's not like it was a surprise.
No.
But Afghanistan was the moment he said, I can do it. And then obviously we saw Iran training Hamas and the Hamas attacks of October 7th. We've seen the collapse of Syria. So in 2 weeks, you now have President Trump coming back. And I want to talk to you about that when we get back from this quick break. So everyone hang tight. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the P.A.S. Report podcast. So, Tony, we have 2 weeks. President Trump's going to be coming back for a second Trump term. And it's actually interesting because we haven't had a situation like this since either Rutherford B. Hayes or Grover Cleveland. I forget which one. That didn't serve 2 consecutive terms. And he now had 4 years to map this out, what he wants to do internationally. What do you think is going to be the world's reaction to a second Trump term? Do you think they're going to be more hesitant and reserved with a second Trump term? Or do you think they're going to be just as aggressive as they've been for the last 4 years under the Biden administration?
No, I think first go around, a lot of the world leaders were kind of like, we really don't want to go along. The Trump thing is temporary. I think they were convinced by those on the left, like Biden. Remember, Biden was still engaged with the Ukrainians during the Trump administration, as we saw on the impeachment issues. I think there's some things there that need to be followed up on regarding Vindman and some other things that were going on. With that said, people were a bit reticent. And obviously, any first-term president is going to be a little bit reluctant to do everything as aggressively as he or she might do the first term, because they want to be reelected. Well, Trump, he's not going to be reelected. He can do whatever he wants to do. And I think world leaders recognize that. And it's already started having effect. It was Trump, who went to the reopening of Notre Dame, the cathedral, and not Biden. It was Trump at the Army-Navy game this last weekend. By the way, Nick, I don't know if you knew this, and I was there at the Army-Navy game. I didn't see him, unfortunately. But Joe Biden has never once shown up at an Army-Navy game during the entire time he's been a president. And that's a tradition. The president show up at that thing, because that's America's game. Anyway, Trump showed up at the Army-Navy game.
He didn't want the FJB chance.
Probably. So just the bottom line is, I think world leaders are recognizing that there's going to be a strong America that does not take any nonsense. And I think this is where you even had the governor of the 51st state, Trudeau, showing up at Mar-a-Lago, begging him not to do the tariff thing. Because you saw this last week, and this is where it all relates. The Trump effect's already happening because I would argue the resignation of the Minister of Finance in Canada directly relates to Justin Trudeau's visit to Mar-a-Lago, because there's fear right now that all the money that the Canadians are able to get over on us, and I love the Canadians, who doesn't love Bob and Doug McKenzie, right? I think they're great. But my point is, Canada, if we decide to even the playing field between our imports exports, it's going to kill their economy, and Trudeau knows that. So I think the minister saw that coming, and she stepped down, and it's going to be a cascading effect. I think a lot of nations are going to take a step back and say, maybe we ought to rethink how we work with the United States. And so on the positive side, Abraham Accords coming right back. I think there's already indicators that that's going to instantly flip back on. The Saudis are going to be on board. Bahrain, Qatar is going to come around, because Qatar's always kind of been in and out regarding Iran. I think they're going to come around. You're going to see effective use of military force when we decide to do it. I was on Newsmax earlier today talking about the fact that the Houthi went from guys running around in the back of Toyota 4x4s with AK-47 rifles to hypersonic missiles in 2 years. How did that happen? Well, the Iranians and Russians, those are Russian hypersonic missiles provided them by the Iranians. So no more of that. No more sending the Eisenhower and Truman battle group into the Red Sea and just pretending to shoot things. Oh, we're going to shoot these things. No more of that. So I think nations in the Gulf are going to recognize, if we come in and say we're going to do something militarily, we're going to do it. And I think that's the big difference. On China, did you see that, Nick, that he's thinking about inviting Xi to the inauguration? I think it's great.
Absolutely. I think it's such
bring
a
him
good
on.
idea.
Yeah. The other thing I would recommend, you're going to think this is radical, but I don't think so. Invite Putin to join NATO. Man, if you put him under Article 5, he can't attack anybody, right? I mean, it kind of makes sense. If you're NATO, you can't attack a NATO member, right? So why not? It's supposed to be a defensive organization. I don't think Trump's going to do it. I'm just saying I would recommend it because it's radical. It gets people's attention, and it changes the status quo. So things like that, I think Trump, and by the way, a little personal note, I was trying to get in to see Trump during the first term. We've talked about this a little bit already. And John Kelly, chief of staff, would never let me do it because I was trying to get in to talk specifically about the Russia collusion issue, and I knew a way of getting around it. And it was radical. It would have worked. And John Kelly would always say, Tony, I'm never going to allow you to see the president because all you're going to do is inflame his instincts. Well, Nick,
so pathetic.
I'm sure. And I talked to Trump about this in June. I said, look, I tried to see you, and this is and he said, well, I don't want to get into everything he said, but I'm just saying that Trump has exquisite instincts. And if you could inform those instincts with fact and potential options, he will get things done. I am convinced of that. So I think that's what's coming.
Well, and let's be honest. I mean, I'm so sick of the 30, 40, 50, 60-year policymakers that have proven to be failures throughout this time.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, our foreign policy is an absolute disaster. And let's be honest, once you had the collapse of the Soviet Union and once relations started to normalize, we could have had a conversation with Russia. Wanted to come into our sphere of influence.
They did. Absolutely.
But we kept on pushing them away. And then under this administration, they pushed them totally in China's corner. Nixon was smart enough to realize that communist China had more in common with communist Soviet Union. So he wanted to create the wedge. All policymakers, they had the old Cold War mentality. But even with Syria, right, we see the collapse of Assad. Now, Assad is a thug. He's a brutal dictator. But Assad was a sense of stability there. Now we see the rebel group HTS take over. You have al-Jawlani, who is someone that has ISIS ties, al-Qaeda ties. He led the al-Nusra network, which was aligned with al-Qaeda, fought our troops in Iraq.
Right.
It looks like, he's the one that everyone's looking at that's probably going to be in charge. And our policymakers, they make the same mistake that they did during the Arab Spring, saying, oh, we're going to see democracy and freedom begin to flourish. No, we're not. We're going to trade one dictator for another dictator. I'd rather deal with the devil we know than the devil we don't know. But I think that we do need our foreign policy shaking up a bit. And so when Trump comes back into office, he's got some monumental challenges on the international world stage. And I want to ask you about that when we get back from this quick break. So everyone hang tight. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the P.A.S. report. So, Tony, under the Biden administration, the world has become dangerously unstable. As Trump takes office, what do you think is going to be the biggest foreign policy challenge that he actually faces?
Well, I think there's three. First off, you just outlined one you're going to have to deal with immediately. You're looking at Erdogan correctly assessing Syria as vulnerable. So I think he, more than any other leader, pushed in HTS to do what they did. I think.
Do you think he's going to invade? Because we are seeing a Turkish military buildup on the border.
Oh yeah, I think he's going after the Kurds, and so I think that's one of the first things Trump's got to deal with is Erdogan and what happens there.
And I don't mean to interrupt you, but how does it work given that Turkey is in NATO? I mean, this is something that is a complex challenge. Now, if Turkey starts a war, it's not like Article 5 gets invoked. It has to be a war of self-defense. You have to be attacked first. But there's already been concern in NATO that Turkey under Erdogan has been moving more authoritarian for years. We've all seen it.
Yes.
So what happens there?
So this was my first, when Mike Pompeo became director of CIA, this conversation was the first conversation I had with him because we were proposing a precursor to the Abraham Accords right in 2017. We're saying these are the things we should do. And he asked me, what do we do about Turkey? It's like, I don't know. I don't. And the answer is, I don't know. But we have to figure it out because, as you point out, he's NATO, but he's not. He more than any other leader allowed for the successful metastasizing of ISIS. He allowed ISIS to become everything it was. And it was because of him that we had to go into Iraq and stop it. Because ISIS was a precursor to HTS. If people are following here, it's all related. And so this time, ISIS didn't successfully take out the Syrian leadership because two other elements were there to help stop him. Hezbollah and Russia. Well, Russia's not available. They're off doing Ukraine stuff. And Hezbollah is gone. Israel killed it. So this time when they said, ISIS, go after him, they did and were successful. So it's a whole fragile thing. It's like a Jenga game, Nick. It's like a Jenga puzzle. You pull those things out and they may all collapse. And that's the danger right now. We don't want to see another rump state like we do with Libya. I would have thought people would have learned a lesson with Libya. You take out a strong man. You take out a strong man we know he's not, he dresses like Prince and talks like Muhammad Ali, but he's our guy, he's ruling things, and you take him out and then you get chaos and you're surprised. Oh, we had no idea. Of course you had an idea. So that's what I think one of the first things he's got to deal with the Israelis, deal with Erdogan on that. Secondly, Russia, Ukraine. Everybody's tired of fighting. People are dying. I think there's time for a talk. The people who are most against talking, strangely enough, are the Ukrainians, who have, I think, lost way more troops than they're willing to admit. But it's time for that to happen. I think Trump's going to successfully get at least a freeze on the war by the time we roll into January 20th. And then China. China just recently, within the last few days, there was a conviction of one of the Chinese nationals who was essentially running a police station in New York. You probably have heard about this. So China is eating our lunch philosophically. I don't think it's so much a war. We have to worry about an invasion of Taiwan. I think we have to worry about the Chinese undermining our system of governance, which they've been doing for the past 50 years. And we've just been kind of ignoring it. So those are the things I think he's going to have to deal with pretty quick when he rolls into office.
Now, do you think that China is going to increase its espionage capabilities here in the United States? I mean, obviously, we've seen the number swell of Chinese nationals illegally crossing the border. It was about 300 a month under President Trump. Yeah. Now it's about 23,000 per month. So, and anyone that knows anything about China knows they have the social credit system where you can't leave that country without the government knowing. I mean, they know exactly who's leaving the country. So what do you think will happen there?
So what I've recommended, I don't know if they'll do it, is we need to remind Xi that he sits atop a nation of fragile economic and social or constructs. The very thing you just said creates weakness within their system. They have huge vulnerability regarding economic. We've seen their economy devastated by their own ignorance of finance. I mean, we've had these big corporations come in, build all these big things, and basically just tank the GDP of that country. So we need to remind them of the fact
the ghost cities.
Yeah. We need to remind them that any given time they've got 2 weeks of oil on hand, that, oh my goodness, if tankers start like blowing up in, the Straits of Malacca, man, you're going to have a lot of citizens really upset with you and they may overthrow you. So I would use a kindler, gentler reminder like, you guys, you shouldn't be doing this because we know you want to collapse us. We know how to collapse you, and do that reminder. It's like, you don't want to do this. And if you persist, you're going to come to find that you're going to have less potable water. Nick, they spend as much on maintaining and finding potable sources of water for their population as they do on defense. So you start reminding them these little inconvenient vulnerabilities, they may rethink what they're doing, and that's the way I would approach it.
Well, do you think that the reason we haven't reminded them is we've kind of forgotten how to use our leverage on the world stage? I mean, the reality is America, despite us losing power and influence over the course of the last couple of decades, America still has enormous leverage over even countries like China. Like, they're not close to overtaking us. Maybe 30 years from now they will be. But it seems our American policymakers have forgotten that. And I want to talk to you about that when we get back from this quick break. So everyone hang tight. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the P.A.S. report. So, Tony, in light of our discussion, do you think that our policymakers have lost sight of everything that's important and instead have went on this agenda of trying to create democracies where it's not culturally compatible and instilling American values where it isn't culturally compatible?
Yeah, let's hit that real quick. My friend Bruce Fine always says that democracy will not spring forth just because you open the playing field. You have to have a certain level of cultural maturity for a democracy to first off be formed and then sustained. You can't just say, hey, we're taking Saddam Hussein out, here's your democracy. It doesn't work like that. Yes, and so that's why we continue to see chaos there. So that's a great point. And I think Donald Trump understands that. He's not simply going to be naive to the fact that we remove someone who's a strong man, you're going to have, rainbows, unicorns, and democracy spring up. So he understands that. And that goes to my second point, leverage. He's a business guy. He worked business in the most cutthroat environment in the United States in real estate, and that is New York City. He built things. So he has no problem being a son of a bitch behind the scenes, and that's what we need. So, he actually bragged the other day that when he first fired on Assad, he was having dessert with Xi in Mar-a-Lago. It's like, oh, hey, by the way, Xi, I just fired on Assad. Just saying. So
well, that's a great point, because right after that, for the first time in about 20 years, China actually got involved with North Korea and put the sanctions on North Korea.
Exactly. So we have the leverage. What's unique about Trump is that he will recognize it and use it. That's what's been absent. So,
well, I mean, that's certainly good news. And as far as the world stage goes, do you think that we'll see stability begin to return, maybe slowly, but the world is dangerously unstable. If you look at all the ingredients that are out there, it mirrors World War II. Obviously, the variables and dynamics are different, but we see the allies, the alignments of the United States and Europe against Russia and China and Iran. Do you think that that's going to start to thaw, especially given that Iran, over the course of, I don't know, just the last 3 months, because of what Israel has done and because of the collapse of Syria, has become significantly weaker? And there are reports that the Ayatollah is on his deathbed and that his son will replace him once he dies.
Yeah. So let me be careful here, because I am fundamentally a libertarian, but I don't believe for a minute that we should be leaving world affairs to random chance. After World War II, to your point, we established a rules-based global order. It is what it is. And the neocons look at that order and want to use military force always as the first option, which I'm against. I do believe we should be the best friend of those nations that want to work with us and recognize that when our interests are threatened, we respond adequately. That sometimes means military force. Military force should not be the first option. So we need to return to diplomacy, and economic cooperation is our first option. Trump understands that. I think that's what we will do. And secondly, we can't just walk away from being essentially the arbiter of global order. Nature abhors a vacuum, Nick. If we step away, others are going to fill it. Russia, China, in the Middle East, Iran filled that void when we stepped away. So
yeah, and they have 4 years of evidence of that under the Biden administration.
Right. We can't do that. It's not our. Well, we should not be arbiters of everything that goes on. We should be the ones who try to enforce basically the freedom of navigation, freedom of trade, and allow for nations to find their own path. Not to dictate, but to be there to allow that space to exist for global commerce. That should be our focus. Global commerce, not global dominance. There's a big difference, and I think Trump gets it. So I think that's what we need to focus on: is how do we then reestablish essentially what we had during the 50s and 60s, not going in, just not having the neocon tendencies, not going in and destabilizing nations, but helping them find a path forward. And yeah, I think we should encourage the Iranian people, who are Persians, not Arabs, to throw off the yoke of the mullahs. I don't think the Persian people want to be ruled by a theocracy who has sworn to kill the Jewish state. I don't think they want that. We should encourage them to figure out a way to basically throw off the theocracy, which makes their lives miserable and troubles the Middle East. So that's something I think we should be helpful in, but not be the one in the middle of that event. So.
Yeah, and it's going to be really interesting to see how this all unfolds, especially when you look at the Trump administration that's had 4 years to prepare for this moment. So hopefully things begin to calm down. Hopefully we do exert our dominance. I'd much rather live in a world where the United States referees the global order than one where communist China does. In any event, Tony, always enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you,
Love
Nick.
to have you back on as international events unfold.
Thank you. I always enjoy our conversations. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.